Townsville. My name is Steph. I'm a lecturer at JCU. Woo! Yeah, thank you. And I am a coral reef geomorphologist. Now, as you can imagine, when I tell people that at parties, I tend to get this kind of a face. No, who am I kidding? I never get invited to parties. But I do see that face a lot, because most people don't know what a geomorphologist is. Well, we study landscapes and features on the Earth's surface, and we try to work out how they form and how they evolve and change over time. And we love sediment. I don't mean the type of sediment that settles to the bottom of my dad's dodgy home brew. Sorry, Dad, we love you, but nobody likes your sediment. I mean sediment like sand, mud, rubble, rocks. If you watch a geomorphologist closely, you'll notice that the first thing we do when we get down to the beach is bend down, pick up a handful of sediment, peer at it closely, rub it between our fingers, and then look around in all directions, trying to work out where it came from and how it got here. Since I've had kids, I can just pretend I'm helping them build sandcastles, which is much more socially acceptable. And we coral reef geomorphologists are particularly peculiar because we only like sediment that is made from the skeletons of dead animals. Dead coral reef animals, to be precise. So think corals and shells. Now, I know this probably makes me sound like a bit of a weird, sediment-loving necrophiliac. You're not wrong. I do love me some skeletal remains. But don't get me wrong, I'd never actually kill anything. I'm not a biologist. Jeez. Yeah, they are the mass murderers of the scientific world. But I'm not here to start a war with biologists because they would definitely win. I'm here to talk about why I love dead coral reef animals and why you probably do as well, whether you know it yet or not. You see, my research focuses on how these skeletal remains are washed together by waves and currents and form piles known as reef islands. I'm not talking about any old island, not Maggie or Hamilton, definitely not Love Island. No. Reef islands sit on top of coral reefs, and they are made only of the sediment from those reefs. Next time you're on an island, if you're not sure if it's a reef island, bend down, pick up a handful of the sediment, sniff it, taste a couple of mouthfuls. No, just joking, you weirdos. You only have to look at it. If it looks like something you'd find on the Strand or pick up at Bunnings, you're not on a reef island. If it's all different shapes and sizes and colours, and you can see little fragments of coral and shell, and maybe some of these beautiful creatures down the bottom called forams, then you're probably on a reef island. If it looks something like this, then I hope you're enjoying your holiday in Bali. And please don't litter. Now, you might be wondering, why should I care about coral reef islands and how they form and change over time? Well, did you know that 90% of influencers use reef islands for their sexy beach pics? It's true. And these aren't the only type of boobies that need reef islands. Yes, brown boobies, first described by David Attenborough when he was a 15-year-old boy, also need reef islands for their nesting, along with many other endangered seabirds and sea turtles. And while most reef islands are pretty small, there are entire countries whose only land area is made of reef islands. Think the Maldives and Tuvalu. So they're fairly important. And what my research focuses on is mapping these islands, how they change shape and size over time, and what is driving those changes, so that we can try and predict how they might behave in the future and how we can best prioritize their conservation and their management. So I have mapped the 233 reef islands on the Great Barrier Reef. It's quite a lot. I told you. I did tell you I don't have a life. Most of the time I use satellite imagery and map them at my computer. But sometimes I do get to go in the field and visit the reef islands to collect data. And most people assume these field trips must be super glamorous and fun. This is what my husband thinks I'm doing when I go on a field trip. This is what my kids think I'm doing when I go on a field trip. This is more like what I'm actually doing on a field trip. Rocking the daggy cargo pants and the high-vis hat and traipsing around with some awkward, expensive survey equipment, mapping the island, taking sediment samples, taking photos and flying my drone. Not so glamorous. It's less sunset cruises, more coral cuts and bruises. Less mojitos, more mosquitoes, unfortunately. And what has my research found? Well, I've found that reef islands are deafening. That's right, those poopies are noisy. Take your earplugs. They are also diverse. On the Great Barrier Reef, reef islands can range in size from about as big as a bus, all the way up to some that are as long as the Strand. But, thankfully, with less e-scooters. And reef islands are also dynamic. How do I know that they're dynamic? Well, last year, my PhD student and I went to Taylor Cay. It's a little unvegetated sand cay 50 kilometres off the coast of Mission Beach. We like to call it Tay Cay. No relation to Tay Tay, although they do both have boobies. Now, we mapped Tay Cay using my drone, and then we went back again 1 month later, thinking not much will have changed. There have been no cyclones, no earthquakes, no eras tours, and indeed, it did look pretty much the same. But there was a terrible smell of rotten egg gas. Now look, I know it wasn't me. But anyway, we didn't think too much of it. But when we sent my drone off to fly on the same pre-programmed flight path that we had used just 1 month ago, it started flying out off over the ocean. There were a few tense moments before we brought it back and realized that there was no mistake. The GPS was right. The entire island had just moved about 40 meters to the north. That terrible smell was the decaying corals on the northern side that were being smothered by this rampaging reef island. So this is exactly the kind of information and movements that we need to know about and understand what is driving, so that we can work out whether reef islands will be able to continue to provide the services that they do for the species that depend on them for their nesting and their influencing. Now, sorry, brace yourself everybody. I'm about to drop the C-bomb. Coral bleaching. I know it's not a really funny topic for a science comedy gig. Maybe that's why I don't get invited to many parties. But it is a really important thing that's happening more and more on the Great Barrier Reef. In the past 5 years, there have been 3 mass bleaching events. And what does this mean for reef islands? The short answer is we don't really know, but given they're composed primarily of coral, in the long run, it's probably not great. But in the short term, when I see those beautiful, complex, defenseless little corals turning deathly white, their skeletons exposed, weakening, just waiting for the next big wave to come and pulverize them into a bit of rubble and eventually sand, do I shed a tear? Yes, actually I do, because bleaching events are devastating. But do I also see a teeny tiny little silver lining? Yes. That dead coral is not going to go to waste. It will be worked around the reef and eventually, hopefully, be deposited up on a tough little reef island, helping it grow bigger and sustain itself longer. And maybe it'll pop up in the background of the next Insta-worthy beach pic. So, I wouldn't build your next house on one, and don't put off that holiday to the Maldives for too long. But reef islands are beautiful, they are fascinating, we still have a lot to learn about them, and they're tough little creatures. They've been around for thousands of years, and hopefully they'll be around for thousands more. Thank you very much, everybody.